She walked into that luxury jewelry store on Madison Avenue with 3 months of savings in her account and hope in her heart. Simone Carter, a beautiful, elegant black woman, just wanted to buy a gold bracelet for someone special. But the moment the jeweler looked at her, his smile froze. "Gold simply doesn't suit dark skin," he said, as if he was doing her a favor, as if her blackness was a flaw that required his professional correction. He tried to steer her toward silver, toward bronze, toward anything that would keep her in her place. She stood there, feeling that familiar burn of humiliation, that rage she'd learned to swallow her entire life. But what she didn't know, what the jeweler could never have imagined, was that the man she was buying that gift for was about to walk through that door. A Korean Mafia boss covered in tattoos, wearing a $15,000 suit, with 3 security guards waiting outside. And what he did next, what he did when he heard those words, it didn't just destroy that jeweler's business. It created something that would change lives for generations. Before we start the story, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about karma, love, and hidden truths move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The bell above the door sang its delicate tune as Simone Carter stepped into Pemberton & Sons, a jewelry boutique that had occupied the same corner of Madison Avenue for 90 years. The air inside tasted of old money, leather-bound catalogs, cedarwood polishing cloths, and that particular silence that only exists in places where poor people fear to breathe too loudly. Simone had saved for 3 months to be here. Every extra translation job, every weekend she'd worked instead of resting, every dinner she'd skipped to pack a lunch instead. All of it had led to this moment. She wanted to buy something special, something meaningful, for the man who had somehow seen past all her carefully constructed walls and made her feel, for the first time in her 28 years, truly seen. Richard Pemberton III looked up from the display case he was polishing. His eyes performed their calculation in less than 2 seconds, the assessment every black person learns to recognize by the time they're 10 years old. The professional smile that had been preparing itself on his lips withered like a flower touched by frost. "May I help you?" The words were correct. The temperature behind them was Arctic. Simone had expected this. She always expected this. "Yes, I'm looking for something in gold. A men's bracelet, perhaps? Something elegant." Pemberton moved with deliberate slowness toward a section in the back, near the cleaning supplies and the items that hadn't sold in years. "We have some options in silver here that might interest you. Budget is always an important consideration, of course." The phrase landed like a slap disguised as a handshake. Simone felt the familiar heat rising up her neck, that old companion called rage that she'd learned to compress into something small and manageable and silent. "Actually, I'd like to see the gold pieces," she repeated, keeping her voice level, professional, everything her mother had taught her about surviving in spaces that didn't want her. Pemberton stopped. He turned slowly, and there it was, that smile, the one that said he was about to do her a favor she hadn't asked for. "My dear, I must be honest with you. It's part of my job as a luxury jewelry consultant." He leaned forward slightly, as if sharing a valuable secret between friends. "Gold simply doesn't suit dark skin. It's a matter of contrast, you understand? Silver, bronze, even steel. These are far more flattering choices for your complexion." The world slowed down in the way it does when you've been struck, but haven't yet felt the full impact of the blow. Simone had heard variations of this her entire life. In college, when a professor suggested she might be more comfortable in a different seminar. at her first job when a client requested someone else to handle their account. In 1,000 tiny moments that people like Pemberton never had to count, because they never happened to them. But never this directly, never dressed up as professional advice, never delivered with that particular combination of condescension and certainty that made it clear he believed he was helping her avoid embarrassment. "I'm here to buy gold," Simone said, and each word cost her something. Pemberton sighed with theatrical patience, the kind reserved for children who insist the sky is green. "And I'm here to ensure that my clients make appropriate choices. Perhaps the jewelry store on the main street would be more suitable for your needs." The translation was clear. "You don't belong here. Your money isn't the right color. This place isn't for you." At that exact moment, the door opened again. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary silence. It was the kind that comes before earthquakes, before tsunamis, before the world reorganizes itself around a new and terrible gravity. Kang Min-jae filled the doorway like a storm given human shape. The tattoos climbing his neck seemed to move in the boutique's soft lighting. A tiger mid-leap, a dragon coiled and ready. His suit probably cost more than Pemberton's monthly revenue. 3 men in black stood behind him on the sidewalk, patient as monuments. "Simone." His voice was soft, but it carried steel underneath, the kind of steel that had been tested in furnaces most people only read about in newspapers. His eyes hadn't left the jeweler. "Is everything all right?" Richard Pemberton III went pale in a way that suggested his body understood what his brain was still processing. That power, real power, had just walked into his carefully curated world, and it was asking questions he didn't want to answer. Min-jae moved through the boutique like he owned it, which, Simone would learn in approximately 7 minutes, he was about to. His footsteps on the marble floor sounded like a countdown. He reached her and touched her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands that had clearly done terrible things. He read the pain there, the kind she was trying so hard to hide behind her perfect posture and her careful words. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low enough that it was meant only for her. Simone hesitated. Pride wrestled with humiliation in her chest. She'd spent her entire life proving she didn't need anyone to fight her battles, that she could handle the 1,000 cuts of casual racism with grace and dignity, and that impeccable education her parents had sacrificed everything to give her. "Nothing, I was just, don't lie to me." It wasn't a command. It was a plea from a man who had built an empire on reading deception, and couldn't bear to see it in her eyes. She took a breath that hurt. "He said gold doesn't suit dark skin." Something shifted in Min-jae's face. Not the explosion of anger that lesser men display when they want credit for caring. Something colder. Something more final. Something that suggested decisions were being made at a level where consequences became inevitable. He turned to Pemberton, who was now calculating frantically, his mind racing through the arithmetic of the situation. The posture, the $15,000 suit, the $300,000 watch visible just beneath the cuff, the security detail waiting outside like patient wolves. "Sir, Pemberton began, his hands rising in a gesture meant to placate. "There's been a misunderstanding. I was simply offering professional advice." "Professional." Min-jae repeated the word as if he were tasting poison and analyzing its components. He turned back to Simone, and his voice softened in a way that made Pemberton flinch more than shouting would have. "You came here to buy me a gift?" She nodded, feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the humiliation from moments before. "Because you thought I deserved something beautiful." It wasn't a question. "Yes?" Min-jae finally looked at Pemberton fully, and the jeweler understood in that moment what it meant to be truly seen by someone who had spent decades learning to identify weakness the way surgeons identify tumors. "Show me the vault." Pardon?" Pemberton's voice cracked like ice under weight. "Your vault, where you keep the most expensive pieces." Min-jae pulled a black card from his pocket, American Express Centurion, the card that has no spending limit because the people who carry it don't live in a world where limits apply. "I'm buying everything." "Sir, surely that's not necessary." "The vault." Min-jae's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. The air itself seemed to compress around the words. Pemberton stumbled toward the back room, his hands shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to enter the code. The heavy steel door swung open with a whisper of expensive hinges, revealing shelves lined with black velvet, each piece glowing like captured starlight. Diamond necklaces with settings of white gold, bracelets of 24-karat yellow gold that caught the light and threw it back transformed, rings with stones the size of plums, sapphires, emeralds, rubies that looked like frozen blood, tiaras that had graced the heads of women whose names appeared in history books, antique brooches, a watch encrusted with emeralds that cost more than most people's houses. Each piece wore a price tag with 5 or 6 digits, numbers that stopped meaning anything around the 3rd zero. "All of it," Min-jae said quietly. "Pack everything." That's over $4 million in inventory." Min-jae placed the card on the counter with a click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Then he took out his phone and made a call. "Jinho, I'm at Pemberton & Sons, Madison Avenue. Bring the lawyers and the acquisition team. I'm buying the building, too." He hung up before the person on the other end could respond. Pemberton turned white in a way that suggested his blood had actually forgotten how to circulate. "The building isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale." Min-jae said it like a law of physics, inevitable as gravity. "You'll find that the landlord is having financial difficulties. I did my research when Simone mentioned this boutique yesterday. You owe 3 months' rent. The landlord is friendly with me." The professional mask that Richard Pemberton had worn for 30 years, the one that had helped him navigate recessions and changing tastes, and the slow decay of old money in America, finally cracked down the middle like porcelain dropped on stone. "Please, this is my legacy. My grandfather founded this business. And you used it to humiliate an extraordinary woman because her skin doesn't match your mediocre prejudices." Min-jae turned to Simone, and his voice underwent a transformation that would have seemed impossible seconds before. All the steel melted into something that sounded almost like tenderness. "Choose one piece, any piece you want. The rest goes to the smelter." "Min-jae, no!" Simone started, torn between shock and something that felt dangerously close to dark gratification, the kind of satisfaction that scared her because she'd spent so long believing she was above needing it. He touched her face again, and she understood in that moment why men followed him into situations where death was a statistical probability. "You deserve to wear the sun itself if you want to. And any man who says otherwise doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you." Pemberton dropped to his knees. The movement wasn't calculated or dramatic. It was the collapse of a man watching 90 years of family history dissolve in real time. "I'm begging you. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." "Please, you didn't make a mistake," Min-jae interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You revealed who you are.
And now you're facing the consequences of that revelation.
This is what accountability looks like when it's not dressed up in polite conversation and diversity seminars that change nothing. Simone looked at the man on his knees, then at the vault glowing with $4 million worth of golden promises, then at Minje, whose love for her had apparently come with the option of financial apocalypse for anyone who hurt her. The revenge was tempting. God, it was tempting, in a way that made her understand why people wrote epic poems about vengeance. But something in her, something her mother had planted there during 1,000 quiet conversations about dignity and grace under pressure, refused to let someone else's pain become the defining feature of this moment. Minje, she said softly, touching his arm, feeling the tension coiled there like a spring wound too tight. Look at me. He obeyed, and she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A willingness to burn the world down if she asked, but also a question about whether that's what she actually wanted. I don't need you to destroy this man. Her voice was steady, each word chosen with the precision she used when translating complex legal documents, where a single mistaken word could change everything. I need you to see me. Really see me. Not as someone who needs to be avenged, but as someone who chose to be here, who chose you, who is strong enough to face this and walk away with her head up. Minje studied her face the way he probably studied contracts worth millions, looking for the truth beneath the words. Something in the rigid set of his shoulders relaxed by degrees. You're right, he said finally, and then he turned back to Pemberton. Stand up. Pemberton obeyed, stumbling to his feet like a man who'd aged a decade in the last 5 minutes. I'm still buying everything in the vault, Minje said, his voice returning to that calm, factual tone that somehow carried more menace than shouting ever could. But not for melting. I'm donating it all to a charity auction benefiting young Black women in leadership programs. In Simone Carter's name, with plaques explaining exactly why. He slid the black card through the terminal that Pemberton offered with hands that trembled like leaves in a storm about to break. As for the building, I'm buying it, but I'm turning it into something useful. Maybe a gallery for Black artists, or a community center. I'm still deciding. Minje signed the receipt with a flourish that suggested he signed away $4.2 million as often as most people signed for pizza delivery. Thank you for the transaction. He took Simone's hand, and his fingers interlaced with hers felt like a promise written in a language only they could read. They moved toward the door together, and Simone felt something shifting inside her chest. Not the hot rage from before, but something cooler, something that felt like power reclaimed rather than power borrowed. At the threshold, Minje paused, his hand still holding hers, and looked back over his shoulder at Pemberton, who stood among the empty velvet shelves like a man surveying the ruins of his own certainty. Oh, Mr. Pemberton? Minje's voice carried that particular gentleness that made it cut deeper than any shout. Yes? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Gold looks magnificent on her. Pity you never had vision enough to see it. The door closed behind them with a sound like a book ending, final and irreversible. Outside on Madison Avenue, the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and honey. The 3 men in black suits melted away into waiting cars without needing to be told. Minje and Simone stood there for a moment, neither speaking, both processing what had just happened in ways that would probably take years to fully understand. You didn't have to do that, Simone said finally, but her voice carried gratitude instead of reproach. I know, Minje replied, but the world needs to learn that some things have consequences. Real consequences. Not the pretend kind that come with apologies and diversity training and nothing actually changing. He turned to face her fully, and in the daylight, his tattoos looked less menacing and more like art, like stories written on skin. My mother died because a hospital treated her like she didn't matter, because she was an immigrant, because her English wasn't perfect, because people like Pemberton exist in every industry, behind every counter, making decisions about who deserves dignity and who doesn't. Simone understood then that this hadn't just been about her. It had been about every person who'd ever been made to feel small by someone who held power they hadn't earned, and wielded it like a weapon disguised as expertise. "Come," Minja said, his voice lightening. "I know a jeweler in Koreatown. His name is Mr. Park. He's been making custom pieces for 40 years, and he'll be honored to work with you. He'll ask you questions about what you love, what makes you feel beautiful, what story you want to wear on your skin. And he won't presume to tell you what suits you." 3 weeks later, Simone walked past the building that used to house Pemberton and Sons. The boutique was gone, stripped clean, being renovated into something new. A massive banner hung across the facade. "Coming soon, the Simone Carter Community Arts Center." Below it, a smaller plaque read, "Because beauty has no skin tone, and gold shines on anyone brave enough to wear it." On her wrist, she wore a custom bracelet that Mr. Park had crafted, her name engraved in both Hangul and English, the gold so pure it caught every ray of light and transformed it into something that looked like captured sunshine. Minjae had commissioned it, but she had designed it, choosing every detail, making it hers in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. She paused there on the sidewalk, looking at the banner with her name on it, and thought about all the young Black girls who would walk through those doors in the months and years to come. Girls who would learn that they belonged in spaces of beauty and creativity and power. Girls who would never have to hear that gold didn't suit them. Girls who would grow up knowing that the world could be changed, should be changed, must be changed when it tried to make them smaller than they were. Simone touched the bracelet on her wrist, felt its weight, its warmth, its absolute rightness. She thought about Pemberton, wherever he was now, learning the hard way that prejudice was expensive in ways he'd never calculated. She thought about Minjae, who had turned rage into legacy, destruction into creation. But mostly, she thought about herself, about the woman who had walked into that boutique 3 weeks ago carrying 3 months of savings and a lifetime of microaggressions, and the woman who walked away carrying something far more valuable, the knowledge that she deserved every beautiful thing in gold or any other material, simply because she existed. The sun was setting over Madison Avenue, painting the street in gold. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before someone knew your worth? Have you ever had someone try to tell you what you deserve based on how you look? Have you ever had to choose between quiet dignity and loud justice? Tell us about your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and transformation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.